The shadow of the prairie. The wind cut across the Wyoming plains like a knife, carrying with it the restless whisper of the prairie grass and the faint smell of distant rain. Twilight stretched its long fingers over the land, painting the horizon in muted shades of orange and purple, but the fading beauty of the sky did nothing to soften the sense of emptiness that clung to the wide, open spaces. The plains seemed endless, rolling out to the far edges of sight, broken only by clusters of cottonwoods and the occasional jagged outline of distant hills. In this lonely landscape, one man rode slowly along a dirt trail, his silhouette stark against the dying light. Elias Kane was a man carved out of hardship and grief, his life written in the lines etched deep into his weathered face. His shoulders, hunched forward, not from the weight of his saddlebags but from the burden of years spent wandering with no true destination. His eyes were gray, storm-colored, and seemed to hold a weariness that even the vastness of the West could not swallow whole. He was not a man given to conversation or laughter. Those things had been stripped from him long ago, left behind in graves he no longer dared to visit. He rode an old bay horse that plodded forward with slow, measured steps, its ribs faintly visible beneath a dull coat. Both man and animal carried the same air of exhaustion, two creatures bound together not by affection but by mutual survival. Elias shifted in the saddle, grimacing as a sharp twinge ran down his back. His hand instinctively brushed against the lump that had formed beneath his shirt months ago, a strange swelling just below his left shoulder blade. At first he'd ignored it, chalking it up to the constant strain of riding and lifting. But the lump had grown. Worse still, it pulsed sometimes at night as if alive. In the mornings, when he stripped off his shirt to wash in cold creek water, he had started to notice faint blue veins radiating out from the swelling, like cracks in porcelain. His breath hitched when he touched it now. It felt fever-hot beneath his fingertips, and every brush of contact sent a shiver through him. He shifted in the saddle and muttered under his breath, trying to shake off the gnawing unease. Pain was an old friend. He'd taken bullets before, endured lashes from his days as a scout during the war, broken bones and worse. This was different. This felt wrong, unnatural. As the sun slipped lower, the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. Storm clouds gathered over the horizon like an army preparing for battle, their edges lit in fiery streaks by the last rays of daylight. Elias tugged the brim of his hat lower, squinting against the wind that had begun to howl through the grasslands, carrying with it the scent of sage and the far-off tang of lightning. He needed shelter. An hour later, with darkness pressing in from every side, he spotted it, a dim flicker of light through the trees, the unmistakable glow of a lantern. Relief flickered briefly in his chest, though he didn't dare hope for much. This was the frontier, and strangers were met with suspicion more often than kindness. He guided his horse down a narrow path, his hand never straying far from the worn revolver at his hip. The storm had broken now, rain pelting him in cold sheets, plastering his coat to his shoulders. Ahead, the light grew brighter, revealing a small homestead. It was a humble cabin, weather-beaten and sagging slightly, with a crooked fence half swallowed by weeds. The porch sagged under the weight of years, and a single lantern swayed in the wind, casting long, eerie shadows across the yard. Elias dismounted slowly, his boots squelching in the mud, and tied his horse to a post. As he stepped onto the porch, the boards creaked loudly under his weight, announcing his presence before he even knocked. He rapped gently on the door with his knuckles, glancing over his shoulder at the encroaching darkness. The door opened a crack, and a rifle barrel met him at chest height. "We don't take in strangers," came a woman's voice, soft yet steely. Elias raised his hand slightly, palms open, his voice calm but rough from days without conversation. "I'm not looking for trouble, ma'am. Just need a dry place to wait out the storm. I can pay." The woman hesitated, her pale blue eyes studying him through the narrow gap. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face for a split second. She was young, no older than 25, with auburn hair braided neatly over one shoulder, her features soft yet lined with quiet determination. She wasn't frightened of him, not exactly, but there was a wariness in her gaze that spoke volumes about life out here on the edge of civilization. After a long pause, she lowered the rifle slightly and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said reluctantly. "But you'll sleep by the door." Elias nodded and stepped inside, tipping his hat. The cabin was warm, the glow from a small stove flickering against the rough-hewn walls. A single bed sat against one wall with a cradle nestled close beside it. A patchwork quilt hung over the bed, and a few simple shelves held jars of preserves and bundles of dried herbs. It was the kind of home built from grit and necessity, not luxury. Elias removed his coat, water dripping onto the floor, and crouched near the stove to warm his hands. "You live here alone?" he asked cautiously. "Not alone." She glanced at the cradle where a baby shifted and whimpered softly. "My husband passed last winter. It's just me and her now." "I'm sorry," Elias murmured, the words heavy with sincerity. The woman gave a tight nod, then moved to stir something in a pot on the stove. The smell of broth filled the room, simple but comforting. Later that night, after she'd settled her daughter in the cradle and gone to bed, Elias lay on the floor near the door as promised, his saddle serving as a pillow. The storm raged outside, rain hammering the roof, wind screaming like a chorus of restless spirits. He couldn't sleep. The lump in his back was throbbing, a deep, pulsing ache that made his skin crawl. He rolled onto his side, gritting his teeth, and reached back to touch it. His fingers came away slick. Blood. He pushed himself up, his breath quickening, and slipped outside into the rain, not wanting to wake the woman or her baby. The storm was blinding, lightning splitting the sky with blinding flashes, thunder shaking the earth beneath his feet. He stumbled to the edge of the porch and gripped the railing, heart pounding as pain lanced through him like fire. And then it happened. The lump tore open. He doubled over with a strangled cry, his fingers clawing at his back as something sharp pushed through his skin. Another bolt of lightning illuminated the scene, and in its flash he saw his own shadow cast against the cabin wall. From his back jutted something that should not have been there. A fragment of bone curved and sharp like an antler. His breath came in ragged gasps as he staggered back, clutching at the railing. And that's when he heard it. A growl. Low, guttural and inhuman, rising from somewhere in the darkness beyond the yard. He turned slowly, rain dripping from his hat brim, and his eyes locked on two glowing yellow orbs staring back at him from the tree line. The creature didn't move. It just watched him. And for the first time in years, Elias Kane felt something colder than fear. Voices in the dark. The rain came harder, thick sheets that blurred the world into gray streaks. Yet those glowing yellow eyes never wavered. They hovered low to the ground, steady and unblinking, like lanterns fixed in the darkness. Elias stood, frozen on the porch, the pain in his back burning like hot coals pressed to his skin. Water soaked his shirt, washing away the blood that had poured from the strange wound, but the antler-like protrusion that had broken through remained. It jutted from his back at an unnatural angle, slick with rain and glistening pale white against the night. The creature growled again, a deep, throaty rumble that seemed to vibrate in his bones. He reached slowly for his revolver, his fingers curling around the worn grip. The familiar weight steadied him. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, the words barely audible over the storm. "Let's see what you are." Before he could draw, a flicker of movement in the dark made him flinch. The eyes blinked, and then he stood motionless, straining to hear over the pounding rain, but the night had swallowed whatever was out there. He staggered back inside, shutting the door with more force than he intended, his breath ragged. The warmth of the cabin hit him like a wave, and he leaned against the wall, clutching his side. "What is it?" "We're gone," the woman's voice startled him. She was standing near the cradle, clutching the rifle. Her face was pale, framed by loose strands of auburn hair that had escaped her braid. "Something's out there," Elias rasped. "Watch the door." Her eyes flicked to his back, and she gasped softly, lifting a hand to her mouth. "Lord, help us," she whispered. He turned his head slightly, realizing what she'd seen. "Don't," he said quickly, his voice low and firm. "Don't ask. Not now." She hesitated, then nodded tightly, holding her baby closer with one arm while keeping the rifle at the ready with the other. Elias grabbed a chair and dragged it across the floor, wedging it under the doorknob as a makeshift barricade. The cabin walls creaked under the howling wind, the storm rattling the shutters, but it wasn't the weather that sent shivers down his spine. It was that low growl, that unnatural stillness in the trees. Time stretched thin, every second heavy with tension. Elias crouched near the window, peering into the darkness, but saw nothing beyond the flickering glow of the lantern on the porch. His hand throbbed from gripping the revolver so tightly, and he could feel the wetness of his shirt clinging to the strange growth on his back. The pain had dulled to a throbbing ache, but he dared not touch it. Behind him, the woman rocked her baby gently, her pale eyes darting toward him every few moments. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Elias Kane." She nodded, as if filing the name away. "Maggie," she said after a pause. "Margaret O'Hara." He gave a faint nod in return, though his gaze never left the window. The night dragged on like that. Two strangers in a fragile truce, bound together by fear. When the storm finally began to weaken, the cabin was steeped in darkness, save for the dull glow of embers in the stove. Elias's eyes felt heavy, but he forced himself to stay awake. Years of sleeping in the saddle and waking to gunfire had trained him well. It was just after midnight when he heard it again. A sound outside the window, not the steady rhythm of rain, but something else. A whisper. He froze, holding his breath. The sound came again, soft and lilting like a voice carried on the wind. "Kane." His heart thudded against his ribs. He rose silently, motioning for Maggie to stay quiet, and crept toward the window. The whisper came once more, this time closer. "Elias." "Kane." He stiffened. Whatever, was outside, knew his name. He flung open the shutter, revolver raised, but saw only darkness and the swaying branches of a tree. And then the yellow eyes appeared again. They were closer now, just beyond the fence. The whispering voice became a guttural hiss. "We found you." Elias fired without hesitation. The crack of the gun shattered the silence, and Maggie let out a gasp. The baby began to cry, but the thing outside didn't flinch. The eyes remained glowing like embers, and then vanished once more. "What is it?" Maggie's voice trembled as she bounced her daughter gently. Elias reloaded, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I don't know," he admitted. "But it ain't just some animal." She hugged her baby closer. "My husband, he used to say there were spirits in these parts, things that came in the night looking for men with blood on their hands." His jaw tightened. "You believe that?" Her eyes met his, haunted but steady. "I do now." He said nothing, just moved to sit by the door again, revolver resting across his lap. When dawn finally broke, gray light filtering through the cracks in the shutters, neither of them had slept. The land outside was soaked and glistening, puddles of water reflecting the pale morning sky. Elias stepped onto the porch, his boots squelching in the mud, and scanned the yard. That's when he saw the tracks. They were like nothing he'd ever seen before, large, clawed impressions in the wet earth, arranged in a way that suggested something walked on two legs, but not quite human. He crouched low, tracing one print with his finger. It was deep, as if whatever made it was heavy. A chill ran down his spine. Back inside, Maggie watched him with wary eyes as he cleaned his revolver. "You're leaving," she said flatly. "I don't want to bring this trouble to your door. Trouble's already here." She glanced at the window nervously. "Whatever that thing is, it wants you." He met her gaze. "Then I'll take it away." Maggie tightened, her hold on her daughter. "You saved us last night, I won't forget that." Elias gave her a faint nod, then slung his saddlebag over his shoulder. But as he stepped outside, the whispering voice returned, low and mocking. "You can't run, Kane." He froze, hand hovering near his revolver, eyes scanning the tree line. And, for the first time, he realized something chilling. The whisper. It was coming from inside his own head. The mark of the hunted. The prairie at dawn had an uncanny stillness, as though the storm had not only drained the land of water but of sound itself. The wind was gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating calm. Elias Kane stood at the edge of the sagging porch, scanning the mist that clung low over the soaked earth. His hand resting on the butt of his revolver, rainwater dripped from the brim of his hat, landing in slow, deliberate taps on the wood beneath him. Every nerve in his body was wound tight, his instincts screaming that danger still lurked nearby. Behind him, the cabin creaked softly as Maggie moved about tending to her baby. Her voice hummed low, an Irish lullaby so soft it was barely audible, a trembling attempt to soothe her child and perhaps herself. The sound brought a flicker of warmth to Elias's chest, a memory buried deep of his own wife humming something similar by the fire, years ago, before the fever had taken her. He pushed the memory aside. Sentiment was a weakness he couldn't afford. The strange tracks in the mud glistened like black mirrors in the morning light. Crouching, he traced one with his fingertips again. The print was wide, deeper than a man's foot, with sharp impressions that suggested long claws or talons. What unsettled him most, though, was the spacing. The stride was too long, the stance too wide. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't built like a human or any predator he'd ever tracked. He rose slowly, his hand going to the tender, throbbing wound on his back. The antler-like growth jutted beneath his shirt, pressing against the fabric, like an exposed bone. It had stopped bleeding during the night, but every movement sent a jolt of pain through him. Sharp and electric. He tried not to think about it, but deep down he knew. Whatever was hunting him, whatever voice whispered his name on the wind, was tied to this thing growing inside him. He turned back toward the cabin. Maggie was standing in the doorway. Now, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, her pale blue eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and determination. "You're leaving," she said again, her voice flat but steady. He nodded. "If that thing's after me, I won't risk you or your little one." She clutched the doorframe, her knuckles white. "You won't make it alone. That thing, it came here for you. If you think it won't follow, you're wrong." Met her gaze for a long moment. "I've been alone a long time, ma'am. I can manage." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing more. He saddled his horse, cinching the worn leather straps with practiced precision. Maggie stood on the porch, holding her baby, the wind tugging at her nightgown. The sight struck him harder than he expected. This young woman, barely more than a girl, standing like a sentinel between her child and a world that would chew them up and spit them out without hesitation. He thought of all the women he'd seen buried out here, women who had crossed the plains in wagons or followed their husbands into the wilderness, only to find themselves alone, scraping survival from a hostile land. As he swung into the saddle, she stepped forward. "Take this," she said, handing him a small pouch. He frowned. "What is it?" "Salt and iron filings. My grandmother swore by it. Said spirits can't cross a line of salt and iron burns them." He almost smiled but caught himself. "You believe this thing's a spirit?" Her gaze hardened. "I believe. Whatever it is, it's not natural." He took the pouch and tucked it into his coat. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added softly, "Be careful, Elias Kane." He tipped his hat to her, then turned his horse down the muddy path. The prairie stretched out before him, endless and silent. As he rode, the sun struggled to break through the heavy clouds, casting pale light across the sodden land. His eyes scanned the horizon, alert for movement, every muscle in his body tense. Hours passed in uneasy quiet, but the voice returned. It came like a whisper on the wind, low and mocking, curling through his mind like smoke. "You can't run, Kane, and we see you." He gritted his teeth, scanning the landscape. But there was no one. Only the rustle of wet grass and the distant caw of a raven circling overhead. His horse shifted nervously beneath him, ears flicking back. Animals knew danger before men did. He trusted the horse's unease more than his own eyes. By midday, he reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow valley. He dismounted, letting his horse drink from a stream while he crouched by a patch of mud to inspect fresh tracks. They weren't animal, not entirely. The prints were long, clawed, and too deep for something of normal size. There was also something else. Faint impressions alongside them, like fingers dragging through the earth. He felt the hair rise on the back of his neck, and then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the daylight. Laughter. Soft, distorted, and echoing. He drew his revolver and spun, but saw nothing. Suddenly, a shadow moved on the ridge above him. He ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding, gun raised. The shape moved quickly, too fast for a man, leaping from rock to rock with inhuman grace. His breath caught as the thing finally stepped into view. It was tall, its limbs long and sinewy, its skin grayish and mottled. Its head was crowned with twisted antlers, larger and sharper than those protruding from his own back. Glowing yellow eyes burned in its skull-like face, and its mouth curled into something that might have been a grin. It crouched on a rock, studying. "Him. You," it hissed. "Half-born. Marked." Elias's grip tightened on his gun. "What the hell are you?" The creature tilted its head, almost amused. "Kin. And prey." And then it leapt. The attack was a blur of motion. Elias fired twice, the shots cracking through the valley, but the creature moved with unnatural speed, dodging and slamming into him. The impact sent him sprawling into the mud, his revolver knocked from his hand. Claws raked across his shoulder, and pain flared white-hot as the wound on his back split open again. He grabbed his knife, slashing wildly, managing to cut deep into the creature's arm. It hissed, jerking back, dark ichor dripping from the wound. "Iron burns," it spat, voice dripping with venom. "Good," Elias growled, forcing himself to his feet despite the searing pain. The creature lunged again, but this time he was ready. He sidestepped and plunged the knife deep into its side, twisting hard. The thing let out a shriek that rattled the rocks around them, then bounded away, vanishing into the trees with unnatural speed. Elias staggered, clutching his bleeding side, his breath ragged. He retrieved his revolver and scanned the ridge, but the creature was gone, and then he heard its voice again, echoing through the valley. "We will finish it, brother." He froze. Brother. The word lingered in his mind, more chilling than the attack itself. Whatever that thing was, it knew him. As he bandaged his wounds and mounted his horse, a grim realization settled over him like a shroud. He wasn't just being hunted. He was becoming one of them. Back at the cabin, miles away, Maggie stood at the window holding her baby close. She could feel it. A heaviness in the air, a sense of dread that clung to the land. And in the tree line beyond the fence, she thought she saw something watching her. The cursed trail. Prairie stretched endlessly under a pale sky streaked with bruised clouds. But Elias Kane felt as though the land itself was shrinking around him, pressing in with every hoofbeat. He rode hunched forward, his shoulders rigid from pain, his hand clutching the reins loosely as his bay horse carried him along a narrow trail that cut through low, rolling hills. Each movement sent a sharp jolt through his back, the wound torn open during his fight with the creature, seeping blood beneath his shirt. The antler-like growth jutted from his shoulder blade like a jagged shard of bone trying to break free. He kept scanning the horizon, his gray eyes alert for movement. But the land was eerily still. Even the birds seemed to have vanished, leaving only the sound of his horse's hooves squelching in wet earth and the occasional creak of his saddle. The silence unnerved him more than the whispers in his head. Those whispers had started again at dawn. Brother. They hissed, curling through his mind like smoke through cracks in a cabin wall. Half-born. Come home. He clenched his jaw, trying to ignore it, but each whisper left a cold shiver running down his spine. It wasn't just the creature hunting him anymore. Something deeper was awakening, something that seemed to know him better than he knew himself. He rode until mid-morning before stopping at a small creek to tend his wounds. Kneeling by the water, he stripped off his bloodied shirt and hissed as the cold water touched his raw skin. The growth had lengthened overnight. What had been a jagged spike of bone now curved slightly, resembling the beginnings of an antler. The sight made his stomach twist. He splashed water over it, his breath shallow before pulling out the pouch Maggie had given him. Salt and iron filings, old folk remedies, charms against evil. He'd grown up hearing his grandmother whisper similar superstitions by firelight back in Missouri, but he'd never put much stock in them. Now he wasn't so sure. He poured a line of salt in a rough circle around himself and his horse before settling down to bandage his shoulder. For a brief moment he felt safe. But safety was a lie. A shadow flickered in the trees across the creek. Elias's head snapped up, his revolver drawn in a heartbeat. The woods were silent, but he knew he wasn't alone. "Show yourself," he growled. A figure stepped from the tree line, not the creature from before, but a man. Tall, gaunt, with dark braids trailing over his shoulders and a wolf pelt draped over his back. His face was painted in black and white patterns, and his eyes were calm but piercing. "You carry the mark," the man said in accented English. Elias didn't lower his gun. "Who are you?" "Calls himself Black Elk," the stranger said, gesturing to his chest. "Lakota, holy man." Elias frowned. "You know what's after me." Black Elk nodded solemnly. "Not just after you. In you." The holy man knelt by the creek, motioning for Elias to join him. With some hesitation, Elias holstered his revolver and crouched down. "There are stories," Black Elk began, his voice low, rhythmic like a drumbeat. "Spirits of the hunt, men who killed without mercy, who took too much from the land. They are cursed. Their greed turns them into Wendigo, monsters that hunger for flesh. Your blood smells of that curse." Elias's jaw tightened. "You're saying I'm one of them?" "Not yet," Black Elk said. "But the bone growing from your back is their sign. They call you brother because they are calling you home." Elias's stomach churned. He'd heard tales of the Wendigo before, back when he was a boy. Frontier legends whispered by firelight. Stories of men who turned into beasts, their souls devoured by hunger and guilt. He'd always dismissed them, as campfire tales meant to scare children. Now he'd seen one with his own eyes. "Can you stop it?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse. Black Elk studied him for a long moment. "Maybe, but not alone. You carry much pain. Pain feeds them. You must fight that first." Elias looked away, staring at his reflection in the creek. The face, staring back at him, was hollow-eyed, gaunt, and lined with years of regret. He thought of his wife, Annabelle, her gentle hands brushing against his cheek the day she'd whispered goodbye. He thought of the blood he'd spilled during the war, the men he'd hunted down and killed for a few dollars more. Maybe he was cursed. "There is a place," Black Elk said, breaking the silence. "A cave in the hills, a place of cleansing. I will take you there, but the Wendigo will follow." Elias met his gaze, steel hardening in his eyes. "Then let it come." The two men traveled together for the next few hours, riding in wary silence. Black Elk's presence was calm but unnerving, like he carried a weight far heavier than Elias's. He spoke rarely, and when he did, it was often in Lakota, muttering prayers under his breath as if warding off unseen spirits. As they rode, Elias's thoughts drifted back to Maggie and her baby. The memory of her standing on the porch in her thin nightgown, clutching her child, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. A protective instinct, raw and sharp. He'd told himself he was leaving her to keep her safe, but now he wasn't so sure. He thought of her late husband, the shadow in her eyes when she mentioned him. There'd been no details, no explanation of how he'd died, just that she was alone now. A part of him wanted to turn back, but he knew if he did, he'd only bring danger to her door again. By evening, they reached a series of jagged hills that jutted up from the prairie like broken teeth. Black Elk led the way through a narrow pass, the sun casting long blood-red shadows over the land. "The cave is near," Black Elk said, his voice low. But before they could go further, the wind shifted, carrying with it a foul, rotting stench. Elias's hand went to his revolver instinctively. "They're here," Black Elk murmured. The first screech came from their left, high and piercing, like metal scraping against stone. Elias spun in his saddle, gun raised, just as a shadow leapt from the rocks. It was another Wendigo, smaller than the first, but just as fast, its body a grotesque mix of bone and sinew, its glowing eyes fixed on him with hunger. Elias fired, the bullet striking its shoulder, but it didn't slow. It lunged, claws raking across his arm, knocking him from his horse. Black Elk let out a sharp cry in Lakota, hurling a pouch of herbs into the air. A burst of smoke erupted, and the creature hissed, recoiling as if burned. Elias scrambled to his feet, slashing with his knife. The creature darted back, circling them. They hunt in packs. Black Elk warned. As if on cue, 3 more shapes appeared on the rocks above, their eyes glowing in the fading light. "Damn," Elias muttered, cocking his revolver. "We're surrounded." The Wendigo shrieked in unison, their voices echoing off the canyon walls, and then they charged. Elias and Black Elk stood back to back, guns and knives flashing in the dim light, the stench of rot thick in the air, as Elias drove his blade deep into one creature's chest. Its blood hissed against the iron, releasing a scream that rattled his bones. And in that moment, he felt the antler in his back twitch, not just with pain, but with hunger. He staggered, clutching his wound, and the world tilted. For a split second, his vision sharpened unnaturally, colors deepening, scents intensifying. He could smell their blood, feel the rhythm of their movements like drum beats in his skull. The voice whispered again, closer this time. "Embrace it, brother. Join us." He let out a ragged scream, slashing wildly, driving his knife into another creature's throat. Black Elk chanted louder, his voice booming in a deep rhythmic cadence, words ancient and powerful. The creatures faltered, hissing in pain, and then retreated into the shadows, their glowing eyes vanishing one by one. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The antler on his back had grown again, the tip now sharp and branching. He could feel something moving beneath his skin, crawling along his spine. Black Elk knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We must hurry," he said grimly. "Your change is coming faster than I feared." Elias clenched his fists, fighting the urge to vomit. "I'm not becoming one of them." Black Elk's gaze was heavy with sorrow. "You already are." Far away, back at the cabin, Maggie sat in silence, rocking her baby by the fire. She felt it again, that strange heaviness in the air, like unseen eyes watching her. And outside, at the edge of the lantern's glow, something moved. The devils. Shadow night fell like a shroud over the hills, and the cave Black Elk had spoken of loomed before them, a jagged mouth yawning open in the rock face, rimmed with frost and moss despite the summer air. The old medicine man dismounted first, his movement slow and deliberate, as if aware of unseen eyes following his every step. Elias followed, though each motion sent bolts of pain through his back. He could feel the antler pressing against the fabric of his coat, threatening to tear through. The wind had died completely. Not even the crickets sang. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that said something ancient was listening. "Stay close," Black Elk murmured, lighting a bundle of sage and blowing over it gently. The smoke curled and drifted like pale fingers clinging to the cave's entrance. "This place is old. Older than your people. Older than mine. It remembers." Elias clenched his revolver tighter, glancing over his shoulder. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, not just watching, but circling. Hunting. They stepped inside, the cave walls narrowing like a throat swallowing them whole. The flicker of Black Elk's torch revealed symbols etched into the stone, spirals, animal shapes, and handprints that seemed burned into the rock. Some of the prints had too many fingers. "These marks," Elias said softly, his voice echoing. "Warnings," Black Elk replied. "The first men to walk this land left them. They fought the Wendigo before the world had names." Elias's breath fogged in the cold air. His body ached with exhaustion, and his wound burned as though fire was spreading beneath his skin. The whispering voices in his head grew louder, overlapping until he could almost make out words. "Hungry, hungry, hungry," he gritted his teeth. "I'm fine," he muttered. "You're not," Black Elk said sharply, "and you will not be fine if you don't fight harder." As they ventured deeper, the cave opened into a wide chamber. The ceiling was high, jagged, and dripping with moisture. In the center of the room lay a shallow pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting the torchlight like a mirror. Black Elk motioned for Elias to kneel beside it. "This is the heart of the cave," he said. "Its waters are said to cleanse sickness of the spirit. But cleansing comes at a price." Elias knelt, dipping his fingers into the pool. The water was colder than ice, numbing his hand instantly. He cupped some to his lips, but the moment he tasted it, he recoiled. It was bitter, metallic like drinking blood. His reflection rippled in the water, and when it settled, he didn't see himself. He saw a creature. His face stretched and hollow, his eyes glowing faintly, and antlers branching from his back, like a crown of bone. His stomach lurched and he scrambled backward, his breathing ragged. "It's already in me," he rasped. Black Elk's expression was grim. "It has been in you for longer than you think." A distant sound broke the tension. A scream, high, sharp, and terrified. Elias froze, his blood running cold. He knew that voice. "Maggie," he breathed. Black Elk's head whipped toward the sound, his face tightening. "They found her." Elias didn't wait for more. He snatched up his revolver and ran, his boots slamming against the stone floor, his heart hammering like a war drum. The voices in his head grew louder, shrieking and laughing, urging him forward. The cave blurred around him, twisting and warping as his vision sharpened unnaturally. He could smell her, Maggie, her scent sweet and warm, and he could smell the foul rot of the Wendigo closing in. When he burst out of the cave, the night was alive with chaos. Maggie stood on the porch of her cabin, clutching her baby to her chest, her lantern swinging wildly in her free hand. The light illuminated 3 of the creatures circling her home, their glowing eyes fixed on her like wolves scenting prey. Their limbs were too long, their mouths stretched into grotesque grins that revealed jagged teeth. "Elias!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fear. He raised his revolver, firing twice. One creature dropped, its skull cracking open with a wet snap. The other 2 hissed and scattered into the shadows. But he knew they weren't gone. They were waiting. "Inside!" he barked, sprinting toward her. Maggie ran inside, slamming the door behind her. Elias followed, bolting it shut. "They won't stop," Black Elk said, appearing behind him, his face grim and streaked with ash. "They've tasted her fear. They won't stop until—" "Over my dead body," Elias growled, reloading his gun. His hand trembled as he shoved bullets into the chamber. Not from fear, but from something worse. The hunger clawing at him from the inside. He could smell Maggie's fear, the baby's warm scent, and it twisted something deep in his gut. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing it down. "You said the cave could cleanse me," he said, his voice rough. "How?" Black Elk hesitated, then spoke softly. "You must face the spirit within you. Kill it, or be consumed by it. But there is no time now. You must protect them first." The creatures struck then, slamming into the cabin walls, their claws raking against the wood. The lantern flickered violently, and Maggie let out a sob, clutching her baby tighter. Elias grabbed his knife, his other hand tightening around his revolver. "Stay behind me," he told her, his voice low but steady. The front window shattered, and one of the beasts lunged through, its scream rattling the walls. Elias shot it point blank, blood spraying across the floorboards. Another came through the back door, and he spun, slashing its throat open with his knife. But as he turned back, the largest of the creatures stepped into the doorway, its antlers scraping the ceiling. Its glowing eyes locked onto Elias, and for a moment he felt like he was staring at a reflection of himself. A dark, twisted version of what he was becoming. "Brother," it hissed, its voice echoing in his mind. Something inside him snapped. A surge of heat coursed through his veins, and his vision sharpened again, the world slowing to a crawl. He could see every detail of the creature's movement, the twitch of its fingers, the ripple of its muscles. He moved faster than he thought possible, slamming into it with bone-cracking force. His antler tore through his coat as he drove, his knife deep into its chest, snarling like an animal. The beast shrieked, and in its cry Elias heard something horrifying. Laughter. He ripped the blade free, and the creature collapsed, but as it fell, Elias dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Maggie stared at him, her eyes wide with terror. Not at the monsters, but at him. because in the lantern light, she could see the antler bursting fully from his back, branching like a tree of bone. Elias, she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned toward her, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. He's not a man anymore. One of the Wendigo hissed outside the broken window, its voice dripping with amusement. Black Elk's chant filled the air, loud and fierce, but Elias barely heard it. The hunger inside him roared louder, drowning everything out. He could smell the blood, the fear, the warmth of life so close to him. And for the first time, he wasn't sure who he'd protect.